ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski. Welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video. We are going to learn more about developing with FileMaker. This is an advanced topic, and it is using Docker on the desktop on an ARM-based Mac. That's an M1 or an M2 chip. So let's head over to my desktop, take a look at what I'm talking about. All right, thank you for joining me here. As I stated, this is an advanced topic, but I am going to show you how I develop. I'm also going to show you the process that I used in order to get a FileMaker image created, or a FileMaker Server image for Docker Desktop. Now you can see up here, up in the corner, actually let me get that zoomed in a little bit better, right there, that is the Docker icon, or the Docker Desktop. So what we're going to see right here as I select this and then choose on the dashboard option is this is just a GUI to a command line tool in order to manage containers. And on a Macintosh, especially an M1 or an M2 chip, things are extremely fast. So let me give you a little bit of a taste of what it's like when I'm developing on my local machine. Now, first off, I use multiple different variations of accessing FileMaker Server. Here are the three biggest ways that you can interact with FileMaker. You have a separate dedicated box. Let's say it's a Mac Mini or a Mac laptop or a Windows laptop, even a Raspberry Pi. Now that FileMaker Server supports Linux, you can run a separate box somewhere. But the problem with that is you have to take that with you if you're developing remote. Let's say you use a laptop. I use both a desktop and a laptop. It's nice to be able to use something that is local on your machine. Now, if you install FileMaker Server on your local machine, it is always running unless you know how to bring it up and bring it down, which I've created a video about that. But the problem is it's in your OS. It's part of your OS. The third option, the third major option, is here using a container or a VM. Now, a VM is basically just going to be a more resource-intensive version of running a container, where a container is going to take advantage of the operating system and be able to run in a much lighter way. So let's take a look. Right here, what I have is in this desktop, and this is the GUI. I'm going to show you things in the command line of how to do this. This is a container called FMS, and I'm using Ubuntu 22, which is what I'm going to be showing you throughout the remainder of this video, and I'm using the 207 release, which is, I believe, 20.1.2, and I just used the very last digit there. But this is how quick it is for me to run a FileMaker Server. Right here, we can see that I've got the domain of localhost, and I'm trying to access the admin console. Well, currently we can't connect to the server, but watch this as we click the little start button here. I want you to count 1, 2, that was 2 seconds, and it's running. So within 2 seconds, if I go over here now and I refresh this page, my FileMaker Server is now running on my machine, and I'm ready to connect, interact with my databases, etc. I'm going to show you where they're located, how to set this up, what the settings are that you need. Setting it up can be a little bit complex. I mentioned it's advanced, but I'm going to walk through every aspect. And fortunately, as of FileMaker 20, Claris actually provides a script that you can use, but you have to modify to do this on a Macintosh machine. And I'm going to explain how they've set it up, what the differences are. We're going to learn about Docker, how to use Docker, how to create your own images. Now, once you create your own image, if you're working with a team of developers, you can transfer that image to them or make it available to them if you want to do so. But in order for me to shut down my FileMaker Server, it takes a little bit longer because obviously the FileMaker Server process, in order to spin down, takes a little bit of time. But we'll go ahead and click the stop button right here, and did I click logs? No, it's stopping. So there we go. You can see it's actually stopping. It takes roughly, 30 seconds or less. I mean, from the time that I clicked that, I don't know how much time that was, but you can see that it is exited now. We come over here and FileMaker Server is not running. So throughout the remainder of this video, what I'm going to be talking about is how do you get this up and running on your machine? What are the fundamentals that you need to understand? And how do you troubleshoot? Because that's the big thing that you're going to come across when you're trying to do this on your local machine. First caveat, you can only run one FileMaker server at, well, that's actually not true. You can run multiple servers, but you can only run one FileMaker server with the default ports. And I'm going to be explaining that right now. Hey there, this is Matt. Thanks for taking the time to watch my free videos on YouTube. This video has been sponsored by what we see on screen right here. Now, if you are looking for hosting, there's a ton of places that you can choose from, but I choose to go with fmcloud.fm, and I'll tell you why. They use the latest technology. Now, I haven't worked with other providers. They may be using the same technology, but I know the owner of fmcloud.fm, Fabrice Nordman. I trust him. I know he knows what he's talking about because his understanding of technology is absolutely solid. Now, these guys are using container-based technology. So every instance of your FileMaker server is completely isolated from another server. How does this benefit you? Well, because of that situation, they're able to provide all of the features, the full features of your FileMaker server. Now, if you go with some of the other providers, you may not have features that you would like to have, such as the ability to run your own plugins. And because each of these containers are isolated from each other, you really have a robust security setup. Now, if we take a look right here, just like any other provider, you can choose from all kinds of different places, anywhere across the globe that you might want to host your FileMaker database system so that your latency is low and all of your clients are connecting really close to your FileMaker server. So if you're looking to set up your own FileMaker server or maybe migrate from another provider, then take a look at the link that I have in the description or on the video or on screen right now at filemakermagazine.com/hosting, and we'll redirect you to fmcloud.fm, where you'll be able to take advantage of their great offers. All right, so let's go step by step of what you need to know in order to get Docker running and running your FileMaker server within a Docker container on your Macintosh. This will also work on Windows, and you don't have to have an ARM-based machine. This will work with an Intel, which is also known as AMD. Common things that you'll hear is AMD 64 or ARM 64, which those are pretty much our architectures that we have these days. First off, in order to get this, you're going to need to download the Docker desktop. Now, at one point in time, there was a lot of hullabaloo about Docker going completely paid, but for local private development, that is available. You can see here, I've gone to docker.com. You can go to /products/Docker desktop unless this URL has changed. You are obviously interested, if you're running an ARM machine, to download the Apple chip. Otherwise, you can run the, if I clicked right here, it would download the Intel chip, which I don't want because I'm on an M1 machine. Once you've got that installed and updated, you will get that little icon where you can basically just open up your Docker desktop. Now, we'll want you to create an account, which you can see right there. I've got my account loaded. But once you've got the account, it's the free account that you're able to use. So let's go through the fundamentals of what Docker is as a, it's an application that runs containers, but there's two fundamental things that you need to differentiate between, and that is what is a container versus what is an image. We're not going to go over volumes. Dev environments is nothing we need to know about, and Learning Center is pretty much self-explanatory. But the two biggest things are containers and images. Now, a container is a running version of an image, and an image is basically like a template. It has what OS do you want and what included operating software do you want to use. Within that, you get to choose what you get to install. So, for example, in my particular case, there's a few things that I like to install additionally, and we're going to do that. Now, the biggest confusing thing about using Docker is that a lot of stuff is done with the command line. This GUI that we have right here, it's pretty and nice, but that's not how Docker is used. The majority of the way that Docker is used is on the command line. And we're going to have to look at that. We're going to be going through that. But this is just the easy way to start and stop once you've gotten to that point. So What we need to do is we need all of the Docker commands. That is the confusing part of things. And here's where things got really beneficial with FileMaker 20 and higher. Claris actually provided a script. Prior to this, I was using a repo from FM Garage, and it was, I believe it's called FT. I forget what it's called, FT Docker. I'll have to get a link, put a link to that in the description. But in essence, Claris is providing us what we need now with all of the Docker commands that we can learn from. So we're going to take a look at that, and I have that in VS Code. All right, as you can see behind the Docker desktop UI, I have VS Code loaded, and we're going to go through things. Now, when I switch to images, now a container can persist, and the number one thing you have to remember that I had to relearn here with Docker Desktop with regards to a Mac is Docker Desktop. What you're seeing right now, this UI and everything, it's running within a VM. It's more lightweight than running a full VM. For example, I have a Windows Parallel VM of a full FileMaker server on my machine as well, but the Docker VM is much faster, super fast, in fact, as we saw how quick it is. So when we look at the images area, this right here is a persistent container. And this is something that once it's set up, I can come in and I can start it, I can stop it every time. It is tied to, or the way that I use them is they are tied to specific versions or specific releases of FileMaker. So you could, for example, have a container that's FileMaker 19 of a certain release, 20 of a certain release, and you basically have each of those. You will be able to share your databases because the container basically references and uses the same folder structure that a default FileMaker server install would be on your operating system. So within images, what we're going to see is the FileMaker script that's provided, and you're going to have access to install this using a FileMaker installer on a Linux machine or on some type of machine in order to access what I'm showing here in my my VS Code. I can't release it. It's Claris. It's theirs. You're going to have to access it by downloading it via, typically the best is your developer subscription. If you don't have it and you're a FileMaker developer, you can get the developer subscription through Claris. Then you have access to FileMaker Server. You can install it on either a VM or on an actual bare metal box, even if it's a Raspberry Pi. Then you can access the scripts and files that we're going to be taking a look at. So right here, you can see that there's this FMS Docker prep. Now, the number one thing that I'm going to say is that Docker allows you to run these containers, and the containers can run anything on whatever your architecture is, whether it's ARM or whether it's Intel. And you basically just need to know what is the requirements for what is going to be running. In the case of FileMaker, we can see this item right here, Ubuntu. So Ubuntu they have code names for the releases of OSs. In this particular case, this 22.04, which is an LTS is another acronym that you will hear. LTS stands for long-term support. The 22.04 release, or the 22 release, is actually called Ubuntu Jammy, Jammy. But in essence, FileMaker, their script will download this, but I'm going to show you how to actually get this yourself. What I'm going to do is, in this UI, I'm going to delete this image. And everything based in Docker, as we can see right here, is based on these hashes. And really, all you have to remember, for the most part, are the first few letters of a hash. You can reference that because most of the time, those are unique enough across all of the different containers and images that you have that's how you're able to reference them. Otherwise, you can reference them by name. So this Ubuntu 22.04, which it's important to recognize that this is a tag to this Ubuntu. So you could have an Ubuntu 22.04, an Ubuntu 20, an Ubuntu 18, all the different versions of a particular OS. Well, for FileMaker 20, we need, or I'm choosing to use 22.04. It's the latest long-term support version that we can have. So you can either download this yourself, or you can let the script do it. I'm going to show you how to download it yourself. So I'm going to click the delete button here, and it's going to ask me if I want to delete this forever. I just deleted that image. Now remember, a container is built off of an image, but you can pull an image down. You can also create your own image, and you can share that image somewhere. So I'm going to switch to the command line now, and we're going to take a look at how we can use some of the commands, which we're going to have to use if we're going to be using Docker Desktop here, especially if you want to make and share your image with your own team. So let's head over to the terminal and take a look at that. All right, so I've got my terminal above me here, and you can follow along with regards to how you actually are able to interact with things. Now, first off, Docker has to be running. I have to see this little icon in order to access the Docker commands. So when I'm in the terminal over here and I'm typing in Docker, that only exists because the Docker desktop is actually running. Let me see if I have any containers running. I do not have any containers running. I am going to quit Docker desktop. So I've just quit Docker. The VM that Docker is running in is not available. So if I am in the terminal here and I type in Docker PS, it'll say I cannot connect to the Docker daemon. That's because Docker is not available because it's not running. You can see that you've got this docker.sock, which is in our traditional run subdirectory. The sock is short for socket. I have to have Docker desktop running. So I will put in Docker here in my launch bar. I execute it. Docker wants to run. I say, okay. I've got a couple of checks there. Now that it is running, we can see that I will have access to the Docker command. So one of the most common commands is Docker PS. Now, PS is just basically short for process, I believe, which PS, let's see, man PS, process status is what it stands for right there. So all I did is I brought up the manual page in order to see what I was actually getting there. Actually, I need to quit out of that. All right, so when we type in Docker PS, it's going to list any of the current Docker processes. I do not have any running at this point in time. What we see on the screen right now is directly analogous to me going over to the dashboard and in the containers area, seeing that this would be running. Now, you won't initially have a container until you build an image so that you can run a container from that image. That is where we get into everything that we have right here and the modification that I made to the scripts that Claris provides within the installer for the FileMaker Server 20. So we need to be able to have the base image that FileMaker is going to need, or the FileMaker installer script for Docker is going to need. With this running, Docker images is going to list all of the images that I have installed. Now you can see that I have a number of them. I use another application called ddev, which allows me to run web servers, Drupal, all kinds of different things. But we can see that we have this FMS Docker prep, and then we have this right here as an image, an FMS U22, which stands for Ubuntu 22.207. I created this image from the image that the FileMaker Docker script actually creates. And again, everything is based off of these hashes. So in order for me to get Ubuntu on my machine, it's really pretty easy. All I have to type in is Docker pull Ubuntu. Ubuntu. And you got to spell it correctly. Now, this is going to look at whatever your local machine is in terms of the architecture and then pull the proper one. So if you're on ARM, it'll pull an ARM-based Ubuntu image. But the problem is, if I do this, what's going to happen is it's going to get what's called the latest. Now, everything after the colon there identifies what you are looking for. So if I want specifically a particular version, such as 18 versus 20 versus 22, I'm going to have to know that that's exactly what I need. And in this particular case, what I need is 22.04. So when you're going to pull a particular image, anything that's after the colon is the tag. Now, the FileMaker server that I'm working with, 20.1.2.207, happens to require either 20 or 22, and we're going to see that that's the case. So by specifying the image name and the tag, I'm going to get the base image of exactly what I need. So if I pull that, in this case, it will pull from Docker. In this particular case, because I already had downloaded it, we can see that it's pulling from the library Ubuntu. So it knows that I already had this because I didn't purge it. When I went to the UI and I actually deleted that, so I went to the dashboard, and when I went to the images area and then I clicked on, killing this Ubuntu with this right here, it was actually, it's like the Mac OS trash or whatever. You had deleted it and it said forever, but it didn't actually delete it forever. It had a cached version within my library. So we can see right here that it basically just put it back in. If I wanted to delete that, there's a Docker command. I would be able to completely clear that out. But with that downloaded to my machine, I've just saved a step where the Claris script could accidentally mess up. And the Claris script is what we're going to get into next, and what you need to do in order to modify it so that it will actually work on your machine. And this is where we're going to talk about the details that you need to know about how things work here with the Docker VM on a Macintosh, as opposed to how the script is set up to work, given that it's set up to work directly on Linux. I'm going to explain the understanding that you need to know why the script won't work by default, but how you can get it to work on your local Mac. All right, so we've pulled down the base image. In fact, it's really interesting. It doesn't show it here, but I want you to be able to know what's going on here in the Docker desktop, which I know a lot of you are going to be using if you're not as comfortable with the command line, because it's very visual and easy to see. Here in the images area, we're always able to search and bring up something. I can click on any of these, and there's also these three little dots where we get additional options of pulling. We're almost never going to push to hub. We're always just pulling and getting things. We're not pushing. We're definitely not pushing an image with FileMaker Server installed up to Docker Hub. Plus, you'd have to have an account and authorize and all kinds of other things. But if we take a look at this in my command line and we do Docker images, and we look at this, it does give us our file sizes. If we look at the Ubuntu one right here, Ubuntu, there, I'll highlight it for you. You can see that this is small. This is tiny. The ability to run a full OS within a container that runs within 1 second of clicking the button on your Mac is just absolutely awesome. Now, as we can see, it actually grows, where FileMaker is going to create. It first creates a base image where it includes or modifies Ubuntu. It modifies it by creating mount points, installing the things that FileMaker Server is going to need, but it does not install FileMaker Server itself onto it yet. It basically gives you, well, the script creates one of two different other images. It will create, which I don't have one of them here because we're going to walk through that. It creates a primary or a secondary, the two ways that FileMaker Server can be set up, where you can have a primary and then the secondary can take requests and get stuff from the primary. Here on local development, we only need a primary. Now, I don't have the primary in here because I deleted it, and I'm showing you how to create your own image off of the primary. But the prep, you can see, is only 1.18 gigabytes. But once FileMaker is installed, you're going to end up with something that's about 3.4 gigabytes. So you absolutely need the space on your machine in order to accommodate this. There are other things that you have to do in Docker in order to successfully get things set up, which we are going to walk through. But what we have now is a situation where we're pretty much set up and ready to actually use the script that will let us generate the primary image. But we're going to need to modify that because the script, as is provided from Claris, is set up for Linux. It's set up such that you would be using, everything would be done with Linux, which on the Macintosh, there are not tools that some of this script actually references, and we're going to go through that right now. Okay, so let's go through this process of how things are created. First off, what I want you to understand as I look over here at my my terminal, I'm just going to type in Docker. Now, what we're going to get is we're going to get all of the different commands that Docker provides. There's a list of them. I do suggest that you become familiar with them. But as we can see, these common commands are the ones that we need to become most familiar with. In particular, the one that we're going to be using the most are Docker PS, Docker images. We are also you really only need the first time that you're going to pull something. And at this point in time, you've pulled your Ubuntu base image. You don't need anything else other than your FileMaker server, which is going to be a .deb file, which we will see. Build you may use, but exec is going to allow us to get into the container and see and interact with it on the command line the way as you would any other computer when you SSH into that. So take a look at your commands, become a little familiar with them. I'm going to go through them with you as we take a look. We need to build an image, and that's where this set of files, we'll take a look at the resources, and I'll break down how this works because I love to give you the understanding. So we have two files right here. We have this Docker U20 and we have this Docker U22. So all this stands for is Ubuntu 20 versus Ubuntu 22. We downloaded Ubuntu 22. This is the target Docker file that we're wanting Docker to use, where Claris has done all the commands for us. Let's take a look at this quickly so that we have understanding. First off, you can see right here that it has this command Ubuntu :2204. We already did that. When we issued a Docker pull, we basically did what this Docker file would do if the Claris script didn't detect it. In this particular case, it's already there. It's not going to need to download it. So there's a number of things these are instructions. All of these things right here are simply instructions that happen inside the container. So in this container that's running on your OS, it's running a program, which is a package manager called apt. It's updating in order to get whatever the updates are that are available. It's then upgrading that in order to get those up to the most recent version. It's then doing an update again based on those upgrades. And then it's actually installing some dependencies. These are all the things that FileMaker Server requires: ACL, curl, expect, a firewall, log rotate, LSB release, which that's an interesting one because we're going to see in the script that the script is set up for Linux, but we don't have LSB release on our actual machine. And the command itself is LSB_release. Sometimes the package names don't match with what they actually are. Zip and unzip, some very common tools. Nginx, which is the web server that FileMaker Server is now using. Yay, that's really cool because Apache, while it's absolutely awesome, I've been using Nginx for a decade plus. And so all of these commands basically are things that are run inside the container, or actually not inside the container. I should say they are run when the build command is building the image to create a container. I believe that's how I should phrase that. Here we can see the common ports that are actually exposed: 80, 443, 2399, and 5003. Now here's the interesting thing, and the key thing about running Docker and FileMaker Server on your Mac. Because it's within a VM, as we're going to see in this script that Claris provides, The Docker desktop for Mac does not successfully allow for, and I had to find this out through an issue queue of the Docker GitHub repo, it does not support being able to run a container with its own IP on the same subnet that your host is on. My machine is called the host. The container is running within the host, and there's the biggest problem that we usually come across is networking. Because Docker Desktop is running in a VM in the Macintosh, we cannot use what Claris tries to set up through, because it's set up for Linux, a Mac VLAN. Mac being the MAC address, or you have an alternate type of network of an IP VLAN, VLAN being virtual LAN. So these things where you map a virtual LAN to a physical interface, which is your Ethernet port going, the thing you plug the cable into, that just doesn't have translation because of the VM. Docker hasn't fixed it, and basically a lot of people complain about it. I had to find that out. The only way, and this is the reason that you can only really run one FileMaker server, is that you basically are opening port for port. So all of these ports, 80 on your host gets exposed or points to port 80 in the container. This is when I mentioned very early on that you can't run multiple servers. That's actually wrong. You can run multiple servers because I could modify this and I could make this 8080. So if I was to append to this and I wanted to go 8080 and make this 44, 4343 or whatever, that's how you could run multiple FileMaker servers in containers on your machine. You would just have to know which port you're going to for the different servers. So I won't modify the Docker file that we have here. We'll actually not save that. The Docker file is pretty simple and straightforward. What you come across that's confusing are all of the different Docker commands. That's where we get to this script right here, the Docker installer. So this is the script that Claris provides within the most recent release of FileMaker Server, which we can modify to get it to work on our Macintosh. And that's what we're going to be going through right now. I'm going to go through a lot of these different setup variables, because everything after the Ubuntu version right here, it gets to this function called interactive, where it's actually going to ask us things about the server or about what the image is that we want to build. We're going to see that. I'm going to do it in the terminal. We're going to walk through it, but we need to create a duplicate of this. Because this script is set up for Linux, you can see that I have simply gone into the Finder, I duplicated this file, which it then created a copy, and then I named it _Mac. And we're going to go through the changes that you need to make in order to get this to build, successfully build an image, which you can then run a container from. All right, let's go through the changes that you need to make in order to get this to run. In essence, here's what we are doing. We are fooling the script into thinking, well, actually, we're not. We're basically just changing it so that it doesn't think that it's on Linux anymore, and we're essentially setting some static values so that it will successfully run on our Mac. Now, here's the first thing you need to know. As mentioned, because Docker Desktop on a Mac is running within a VM, we cannot create a separate network where we bridge to the physical Ethernet port and that container runs with its own IP. We can see that when we type in Docker network ls, we're listing the network, we can see that there's this internal bridge network. This is where the VM on my machine, the Docker VM, at a low level is actually communicating with the actual Ethernet jack and going out to my router and then routing out to the internet and doing everything that it needs to do to communicate and transfer all the packets. Well, this is where the port mapping is the only option that I have, because it's going to be using this bridge. Now, what the script wants to do that we can see over in the script is it's got this information over here. Let's see if I can make this a little bit wider so that we can sort of see what's going on over here. The script, by default, we can see that it's taking an IP address. There's an interface, which on the Mac, your typical interface is going to be just EN0, which Docker does not like and won't use. All of this we don't care about. That is because we cannot set up a MAC address-based virtual LAN that will actually successfully communicate. So this separate host IP, this number of secondary, we will get to that, this IP address, it really doesn't apply because we're using that bridged network. So here's what I did to change to get this to build an image successfully. First off, we are not going to be using a primary, secondary, whole setup type of thing. So I basically said, yes, I want to create this as a primary. The number of secondaries, nope, I don't want a secondary machine. I don't care about the IPs because they won't matter. We're going to be using the bridged network. The interface doesn't matter because you're not going to be communicating with the interface. Network doesn't really matter. We're not going to be creating a network a bridged network or a Mac VLAN network. So this doesn't matter. Don't need to change this. List of IP addresses. We don't need that. Again, all dealing with networking. Machine num, you can leave this. Connect, you can leave this. Don't need to set this, but this, Docker installed. This you do want to say, I've got Docker desktop. So we want to change this to a value of 1. Install type, you can set these up, and I've tried this where basically, I'll just set in admin and put in a pin of 4 zeros. That's something that, for the most part, when I ran the script, it went through interactive mode anyway. I'd have to read the script and learn what it's doing, and so it asks you for all of these things anyway. So setting these things may be pointless. But one of the things I do suggest is you do want debug mode on. And interactive, see, here's where it's getting in. This $1 is an argument. It's an argument coming into this script. So I believe you'd probably be able to, when you put in the script, it comes in, and maybe it's defaulting to 1. Ask for inputs. See, they don't have anything where they actually say whether they are or are not doing that, but that's the case. It defaults to interactive is what I found out, which is fine, which we want to see as we walk through things. Certificate, you're typically not going to be using this, so we're going to be supplying 0. All of these things, again, are asked in the interactive mode, but I'm going through them here so that if you do want to use this, you can, but it actually doesn't. Number of cores, you can usually leave this if you're really wanting to performance test. You can bump it to 4 if you've got 16. Depends on how many cores your M1 has or your machine. Memory limit, you can adjust this. And then the current directory. The current directory is important because that's where we put the FileMaker Server image. We can see right here as I slide this out, here is my FileMaker Server image, this .deb file. So this is what's happening, is this current directory variable, it treats this as a mount point, mounts it inside of the container, and when it does, inside the container, it's able to see the FileMaker Server. That's where it's able to install that from into the image so that you can create the container. The other thing that we need, the most important thing that we need to set is this right here, Ubuntu. This command, which is on Linux, is saying, hey, operating system, what version are you? And they are piping this to an app called, or to a binary called cut, which is saying, get the OS version. We have to cheat, and we are going to comment that out with the hash, and we are going to put 22.04. That is literally the version that we downloaded is the version that we're going to support. This does have to be set within the script because the interactive will not ask for this. So that's pretty much all that we need to set when it comes to the script. This interactive, we can see right here, you're going to see these questions. Do you want to create? What is the IP address? How many secondary, etc.? And that's the stage that we're at where we're going to generate the image, and then we're going to be able to get that container started. and actually see FileMaker Server running on our machine, where we can just click a button to start it and click a button to stop it, and we're good to go. All right, we are ready to build the image. We've changed the configuration settings for the script. Now, as I mentioned, what I did is I left the Docker, FMS Docker installer as it is, and I created a duplicate version so that I could run this anytime that I wanted. And I should mention, by the way, where did you get this? I probably put a little thing that came up on the, when I started to introduce this. You get this script, this FMS Docker installer script, in an install of FileMaker 20 Server and higher, and it's within a tools subfolder, but it's I don't know if it's an extras or advanced. It's somewhere within an install of the FileMaker server that I found it. You will not have this run.sh. I'm going to go over that. That's what we need once we create our own image of something. The only thing that it will come with is this installer. You duplicate it, you modify the values that we just modified. You have to put your .deb FileMaker server. We can see that it's the 207 release here, and that's pretty much all we need to do is once we've got all of those modified. So with those modified, let's go ahead and run that. I am going to flip over to the Docker so that we can see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and delete this so that it's as it would be. Oh, I should mention, just read the README. The README will give you information of what it's going to do in order to create the images that it creates. So over in Docker Desktop, it's going to create the prep, and then it's going to create the primary. So I'm going to delete this as if I did not have any of the Docker containers. Ubuntu, we've already downloaded. We are now ready to run with all of our settings. So over here, I am in the folder. I just created a folder. I have a folder called data. I have FileMaker data. I created a Docker subfolder, and then I created a Claris Docker FMS because of this installer script. So at this point, I'll do an ls. Well, I have a shortcut for which is that LA is a shortcut for what would be this lslha with color, and it lists the files. We can see, just like I have in VS Code, there are my two Docker files. Here is my modified version of the installer file right here. I've got my FileMaker.deb file. It's going to pick the installer script is going to pick that up based on looking for, I believe they look for this in conjunction with this as a regex. And all I have to do is really run this now in order to build that container. So we're going to walk through these steps. I am going to type in one important thing. One of the more important things that you must remember is that we must do this as a root user. So we're going to have to type in sudo, then we're going to be running our Mac version of our script. That's got all of our changes, the most important being that we changed that Ubuntu version from calling the command lsb release to 22.04, knowing that we have the base image already in our Docker and the is Docker already installed. Those are the two critical ones. Yes, or change it from a 0 to 1 that Docker's installed, and then the version of Ubuntu. So with this command now, we can run this. It's going to ask you for the password that is your password on your Mac. Let's see if I get this. Yep, there we go. All right, so we are now in interactive mode here on this, and we can see what it's going to ask us. It's all of these same things. Debugging was, we turned debugging on, but debugging comes on by default. We can see that it's telling us that we have those two cores and the memory, we would be able to adjust them. And these are all of the values that we set on those variables. It's basically just asking us for them. So walking through those variables, you didn't have to change them because it defaults to interactive mode, but it's possible to have passed to this command a 0. If I had put a 0 right here after this, I'm pretty sure that it would bypass this whole process and use all of those values that we had set in the script. But again, I want you to be confident and understand, so we're walking through the interactive. Do you want to create a primary container? In this case, 1, yes. How many secondary containers? We don't. It's just a local development machine. Do you want to create a Mac VLAN network? No, we absolutely do not, because it will not work. We're going to map the ports. It will do that for us, and it will use the bridge network. Do we want to configure the system specs? This is where you would change these values if you wanted to, but in this case, I'm okay with 2 cores and the 8 gigs of memory. I have it, so I'll say 0. Do you want to import certificates? It's a local development machine. I don't need SSL and dedicated certificates. You could create a self-signed certificate or go even more complex and use Let's Encrypt, but we don't need to. I'm putting 0. I'll just use the default FileMaker Server certificate because no traffic is going out of my machine. Do you want to disable this routing? I forget what, is that web publishing engine? I forget what the M is for. Anyway, you don't want to do that. Do you want to turn debug on? Yes, that you want to turn on because you want to see what's happening when Docker is building the image inside the image and when it's attempting to run the container. So the username is just the username that you're going to use, hopefully. Now, I did have some issues with this, and I just put admin, and it asks to confirm, and it wants the PIN, and I put 0s, and there we go. So this is the point where you need, if you haven't watched this whole video and you tried to jump ahead, this is the point where you need to do something that it won't work. It will fail because the Docker VM will not have access to these folders. These 3 folders have to be set up on your machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new window here. And what's great about a script is that script will just sit there waiting, asking for the questions while you go do the things that you need to set up. So let's do what we need to do. You can basically copy that right here. I can copy this, and I can come over, and I could do what's called a make directory, make dir, and I can put in the flag of p parent in order to create this. And what this will do is if you do not have a /opt on your Macintosh, with a /FileMaker, with the FileMaker server, with the data, which this is the default path. This is the path that FileMaker server uses if you were installing FileMaker server on your actual Mac machine as a service. There are those 3 folders that need to be set up. So you would basically replicate this same sequence, but because we are installing into a folder that probably is not privileged, you are going to have to more than likely do this command under the premise of sudo, meaning, and this is where you would pass your username for your Macintosh, your password. It would create all of these directories. It would create the data directory, the FileMaker server directory. It would create the FileMaker directory and the opt directory because of this flag right here. This would create the directory with a user that is probably incorrect. So after you've actually made the folder, which at this point I already have the folder here in my setup. So I am going to get rid of all of this, and I am going to do an LHAA of opt FileMaker. Let's go ahead and just list that. So here's an important thing to recognize. Everything with regards to how things work within Docker or within any operating system comes down to permissions and privileges. So as we can see right here, if I had typed in the sudo, what would happen is it would more than likely be created with an owner, a user of root and wheel, where we need it to be set to the account, because my account is a fully privileged account. It has to be set with your name and so forth. So sometimes you have to actually modify and change that setting. So after the sudo make directories, you sometimes have to go in and do a sudo change own, which is also chown, of that user, you would not be putting Matt. You would be putting whatever the name of your account is for your Macintosh. And you can also do this recursively on go FileMaker, FileMaker Server data. And so this would basically set all of these folders along this whole path to be owned by this user and group, which is what we need so that Docker can actually load or mount these inside the container. And it needs to be done on these three. These are the only three that the script are going to map: data, logs, and CStore. But it makes it really nice that we're able to use these because, as I'm going to show you, in your Finder, you can basically just set up a link that you click on it, and you just have instant access to all of your databases, your backups, etc. But there's one more thing that you need to set up. You have to set up in Docker access to these paths as well, meaning Docker needs to know that an image, or more specifically, a container, can actually mount these images, as we're going to see with the Docker command. That is found here in the GUI in the settings. We go to the resources area, and then we go to the file sharing. Here is where you can see that I had to add these same three paths. So first you have to make the folder. Second, you have to make sure that that folder has the ownership of the account that's running Docker. My account, Matt, on my machine, and admin is the group, which is common to all Macs, is going to allow this Docker to be able to mount these inside of a container. And that's what we need to have happen. So once you have those things set up, you're ready to continue with the script. And the script is going to ask us, do you want to share this with the primary container? The answer to this is yes. This is what makes it really cool, in that if you're running multiple versions of a FileMaker server as containers, you're going to have a FileMaker 19.204, a FileMaker 20.202, a FileMaker 20.207. You can run each of these different versions. Now, really, you only need that if you're doing testing, or you know that you need the different versions. But the fact that you can, and it shares and uses the same files, means that you can basically just switch to different versions of FileMaker Server to do what you want. So as soon as I hit yes on this, we are going to see it do a lot of different things. This is where I should turn off my reverse proxy. Let me switch that off. We'll turn off the network filter. That hopefully won't bog things down. But you can see that what's happening above me there is it is going out and it's building the image. The image is making a request. These are all the app updates. You can see that word jammy, where it's actually pulling from the Ubuntu repositories all of the updates it needs to get. Let me scroll down so that we can see this. It is unpacking all of these. And normally I wouldn't sit here and have you watch all of this, but it's good to know if you haven't done this. Here we go. It's starting the installation of the FileMaker server. It's created the group right there. You can see that it's saying it unpacking. It's going to get all the rest of it, setting it up. And what we're going to see, here we go, we've got our post installation right here. Here's where it's actually setting up the Nginx server. There's starting FileMaker server right there on the primary machine. Now here's where it's not able to go out to the network. And I haven't been able to solve this. I don't know that you need to solve this, but in essence, it's trying to communicate, I believe, with the FileMaker, I don't know if it's the registration servers or what it is, but it's trying to get a session token. We will see that it will bail out here. It will not be able to get that token, but it will still continue the installation so that we'll be able to run it. I don't know what that is. I've tried multiple different variations. It's more than likely networking. It's not able to get outside of the image that it's building. But in essence, it's pretty much done at this point in time. it will get stuck at this because it hasn't been able to communicate or get confirmation back that the container is running. But if we go over to Docker Desktop and we close this out and we go over to our containers, we can see quite clearly right there, FMS primary. It created that container and it's running all of these ports. If we look at this, it is a running container. The script works successfully. We should be able to go to our local host and be able to actually access the admin console. In order to get the script to close out here, we basically just have to Control-C or cancel out of this, and then we'll get a completed saying right here. Actually, I'll just do Control-C. Let's do it again. There we go. So there you can see that we got the end of the screen, the end of the script. We had to cancel out of it. It was because the script didn't get feedback back from within the container, I believe, or not necessarily the image. But we can see over in the images, remember again, you have to distinguish between images and containers. A container is the thing that runs that you can actually access. An image is the base that is used as a template to create a container. But here in the images now, you can see that FMS Docker, we've got the prep, which is the base that FileMaker uses to create either a primary or a secondary. And then we've got this FMS Docker, again, the primary, which is, we can see right here, based on the size, the base container, the prep, which includes FileMaker Server. And it pulled all the things it needed, all the dependencies, everything, and it is literally running. Although we can see that the in use right here is saying that the container that we have, the primary, is actually running, and we're going to connect to the admin console and see if that actually worked. Hopefully it did. It might not have, and I can show you how you now update the image to have things that you like, save an image so that you can transfer that and keep it for later use with the things that you like. So yes, this is a long video, but I'm giving you every bit of understanding about using Docker locally on your desktop here. All right, so we're ready to test and see if we can get into the admin console. I'm pretty sure we're not because of that script hanging that we saw right there. It wasn't able to get feedback back and forth, but it should work. We should just be able to restart the container. So we are able to go in and type in localhost and basically just go to admin-console, and that's what we're wanting to do. It would use 443 or port 80. All of those ports have been mapped. We can always see, as I hit this, we can see that it's stalling out. It's not actually going to connect, which at this particular juncture is not that big of a problem. I hit escape. I am going to test this by simply stopping the container and then rerunning the container. So I'm going to click stop over here, which if you'd like to know, which we should learn how to do, is how to stop this on the command line as well. Here in the UI, this is shutting down FileMaker. We can see that we got a similar exit right there, but now let's run it again. And I'm guessing it's tied to that token. I don't know what's going on, but now that we're running that, let's come back over to this and let's put in localhost and let's put in the admin console, admin-console, and let's get all of that taken off. There we go. It is running. So there's something about the initial setup of the image that the script, when it calls out, doesn't actually get the feedback that it needs, so we had to cancel out of this. I had to break the script, and forcing it this restart of the primary. So basically, because it said it was restarting the primary container, we had to do that manually through the Docker desktop. Now, how do we do that through the UI? So through the UI, we basically just click this start and stop. And it's got a script that will take down FileMaker Server gracefully and bring it back up so it doesn't corrupt your files, etc. Over here in the command line, let's do it over here. We'll make sure that's above my head there. When we do a Docker PS or list of all of the processes, we can see that it's listing the process, and here is the name that FileMaker Server gave it. So if we do a docker stop FMS primary, that command right there is simply going to stop or be the exact same thing as me clicking this button right here. So we'll go ahead and stop that. And what we'll see is you'll get a pause right here in the command line where it's just waiting to run the shutdown scripts, everything that needs to do. It just shut down. And we can see over here, the formerly the stop icon is now the run icon, where we'll be able to run that again. So at this point, this is a long video, by the way, but hopefully you've been learning everything that you need to know. Not everything. There's a ton to know about using Docker. A lot of it comes down to the commands. What I'm going to show you is how do you get into the container and how can you install things that you like if you like to use certain tools. I like Vim as an editor. And what do you do to set it up so that it's convenient for you to use? Everything that makes it really nice to use Docker for running FileMaker Server as a local development environment, and doing that in the Finder, etc. Let's take a look at that. All right, we have successfully created an image. We have just that one little glitch where it can't communicate. We stop the script, but if we restart the server, we know that it's running and everything's great. So what we want to do is we want to add the things that we like that make this an image that we could use to give to somebody else, maybe a fellow developer, that they need the exact same environment. That's one of the benefits of Docker. You can't mess up something that is exactly the same on everybody's machine. So this is why I love Docker. If I'm working with somebody, I can set up a FileMaker server as a Docker image. I can include the plugins that I like. I can include any binaries that I use. All of those good things, and then I just give them the image, and then they can boot up their own container. This is where we get into having to know some of the Docker commands, how they work, and it's essential that you understand what you're doing when you're going to call an image. This is where when we look at the scripts, so one of the scripts that is not available that comes with the Docker installer that Claris provides is this run.sh. So you have to learn Docker commands. So as I select this, we're going to go over this. If I can get that zoomed in well enough. So here's what happens. When you when you tell Docker, I want you to run an image, you have to give it some additional instructions. In particular, ports. Like if we're using this bridged network where the Docker VM on my Mac is communicating to the host, my Macintosh operating system, it has to know what ports to open up. So we can see that there's this flag right here of privileged, but let's go through this. So these are things that I simply just copied out of the Claris script. This isn't even really needed. In fact, I would be able to kill this particular flag, but I just left it here so that we understand. Please don't get confused by the fact that this IP address is not assigned. Because you use a bridged network, it uses the network of the bridge, which I believe is 172 dot something. But it does reference the number of cores, the memory, and it absolutely uses the current directory as a mount point. Here's the command. Docker. The Docker command is to run something. It's going to run it in a detached mode. I have changed the host name. Where formerly FileMaker was using FMS primary, I don't want to confuse FileMaker's method of running Docker containers with my own. And plus, FMS is just a much easier, shorter way to reference things. I can just type FMS. So the host name, I set it to FMS. The name, I set it to FMS. The port mapping, 80 to 80, 443 to 443. The actual FileMaker port for client. And then I forget, this might be discovery services. I forget what they call that on the Macintosh. IP address not really used. The memory references the memory variable right there. The number of cores references the number of cores. Here is the important thing. install is what gives the, which we don't actually need this now that FileMaker is installed. This line could be removed because we don't necessarily need to have the install folder mounted inside the container. But we absolutely do need these three, which Claris is just mapping to what the default location would be if we had installed FileMaker Server on our machine as a normal FileMaker Server install. Finally, you can change once you have made your own image. This right here is whatever image you are calling. So if I take a quick trip over to the Docker and I go to the images area, normally I would be calling FMS Docker primary. So let's go through that. I have my run script set to my own image, which I have modified, where normally this, let's comment it out, this would be FMS Docker colon, what'd they call it? I forgot already. Primary, I believe. Yeah. You can do that right there. Although in Docker, they are, in their containers, they are running the FMS Docker prep. You would want to run the primary because the primary has FileMaker installed. This primary used the prep and installed it. We're going to take a look at how you can actually save an image or save a container as an image. That's going to be an important thing to do. For the most part, you can ignore this until we get to the fact that we're going to create this image ourselves from a container. So we need to get into the container. How do you do that once it's running? So let's go run our container. Boom, FileMaker Server is running. I love how quick it is. It is so incredibly awesome. With this container running, we need to know how to get into this container. Well, there's a number of ways that we can do this. First off, over here on the command line, we can always type docker ps to see which containers are running. We can see that this container of 2834, we could reference it by that, but we can also reference it by its name, which is at the very end here. Names, it's just getting wrapped on my command line here. So if I want to get into this container on the command line, I can type docker exec, which means execute, and we're going to put in a flag of IT, which stands for interactive terminal. I don't know. I'd have to look up the man page to know if that's exactly correct. But in essence, that's what we are wanting to do. Now, at this stage, I could put that 2834. That's because this Docker really knows specifically if you reference by hash, I can get it. But you can also use FMS primary. So if I type in docker exec IT FMS primary, the last value that I'm passing to it is what command do I want it to actually execute. This is where I'm just going to pass in a shell. You could put bin sh, but the standard shell really isn't that fun. So I'm going to type in bin bash. So this right here is going to get me into the container as a command line, and it allows me to add additional things to the container. So I execute that. We can see that my prompt has changed. I am now in FMS primary. So at this point, I can actually do an ls lha on root. So I just listed the whole root. Notice one thing that's interesting here is there's this install folder. Remember that one of the commands on that docker run command was to mount the install folder? What happens if I actually go into that? What happens if I type cd install and I do an ls lha? Look at that. There's the FileMaker installer. There's my run script. There is my Mac version of the script. So in essence, what it did is it maps a folder that's on my Mac as a mount point inside the container, and it's doing the same thing for those three areas. This is where you get to configure your Mac in a really nice way. Let me go to the Finder and create a new Finder window. I will switch to, say, for example, my desktop. I'm not always wanting to reveal all my content, but that'll work right there. All right, so what you can do is on your Mac, you will have, all of your common folders. So one of the things that I do as we scroll down here is I actually make a link to FileMaker Server, and you can call this whatever you want. But when I click this, you can see that it takes me to that subdirectory of opt FileMaker, FileMaker Server, where FileMaker Server normally installs all of its things. There are the 3 folders that we had to learn, that we had to create with the make directory command, that we had to change so that they had the right permissions, or not the right permissions, is more so the right ownership, so that Docker, which is running as my username, Matt, actually is assigned as the owner of each of these folders, allowing the container to create the mount points such that all I have to do in order to get databases into my FileMaker server is simply drag and drop them directly into this folder. But don't do that while FileMaker server is running. I never even determined if I could log into that. Let's switch over to Safari and make sure see if it used. Nah, it didn't. Oh, bummer. Here's one of the problems that I came across. That even though you use the script, I use the admin, and for some reason it didn't use those values. I know I used admin as the password, and I cannot sign in. Enter a valid username. It didn't want to get that in. So what I had to do is I had to go into the container and reinstall FileMaker Server. So here's how we get into the server. We've already run that exec, and we're in right now. If I wanted to reinstall this, I could remove this. I can do and reinstall a FileMaker, and this is just, doesn't matter whether you're on Linux, a container, a VM, anywhere. It's just standard commands you have to know if you're going to be running the Linux version of FileMaker. You can do apt remove, and you could remove this FileMaker server, remove it completely from existence, reinstall it while you're in the container here, so that it'll ask you for the username and the password, and essentially reinstall, because the pin and everything isn't transferred. I didn't want to take the time to troubleshoot the script to get it to work. I just knew I could reinstall FileMaker Server and it would be done within a few seconds, especially since all the dependencies are already installed. So you can remove it. You can also do, I believe, sometimes, I don't know, apt may have a reinstall command that allows you to reinstall. You can always look at the commands that a particular function or particular binary has by simply just typing in just the value itself, or you can type in man apt if you want to understand what's going on. And here are your most used commands for man. There it is. Man reinstall, man remove, auto remove, update, upgrade, full upgrade. We saw some of those. You have to become familiar with these commands if you're going to be doing this, but once you are, it's so cool to be able to use them. So let's assume that I've done the reinstall. We know that FileMaker Server is running. We're able to get into that. All you have to do within the FileMaker is actually within the FileMaker admin console is basically stop the database. You go into the administration or one of them, and you stop FileMaker database. Then you can drag new databases into your databases folder. Then you can restart the database server, and those databases will be right there. You don't have to go through the FileMaker sharing and upload process, because the container is just simply mounting a local folder here on your machine. So you can just drag and drop things in the Finder. You just want to make sure that the server is not running, the database server, so the database files are opened. You want to make sure that the database server is stopped whenever you move things in and out of the folder, because that's when you corrupt things if you don't pay attention to the fact that a process has a folder open on the OS. Whoosh, this is a lot, but hopefully you're getting a lot of value out of this. So the last thing that I'm going to show you is I'm just going to show you the commands and let you research how you can create your own image and how you can get tools on that you actually like. So here in the command line, I am in the container on the command line as if I was in a separate server. This is when you get to install things. I know apt has already been updated, but I like to install some additional tools for myself. I'll install Vim, PSMISC, which actually gives me access to a command line that I like called PSTree, which shows the number of processes that are running. So I will type in PSMISC, and I will also, what else do I add? I like htop as a way to look at a thing. So let's just go ahead and install these. It'll say yes. Those will all be installed. The whole point being, there may be additional tools that you like or that you use. So, for example, on my FileMaker servers, I will install the MBS plugin on the server side, and I will also, let's say, apt search. I think Miller is the name of, yes, Miller is a, it's a JSON, actually, it's more than JSON, but it is a crazy cool way to process JSON. There's also JQ. So apt search JQ. So I will often use those as well. Does it have just basic JQ? Let's get up to the J's that we see here. HIJ. Come on, guys. FQ, go JQ. There it is, JQ. So yeah, right there. So these just, just because it's good to know, these are two things that I will do: apt install Miller and JQ. Accessing those through the command line through either MBS or the Base Elements plugin, which unfortunately Base Elements, as of the recording this video, is not running on ARM. Hopefully they'll get that done really pretty quickly. But this is how you get a lot of power in FileMaker, is being able to access these things on the command line. Once these are all installed in your image that you like. So currently, here in the GUI, this container FMS primary has been updated. It's got Vim, the tools that I like. I've installed my plugins. I've made this the FileMaker server that I like, the ideal image. This is when you're going to, outside of the container, you're going to save this image. And let me show you how easy it is to do that. So I am going to exit being in the console for the container, just typing exit right there. I am now back in my Macintosh operating system. All I have to do is I can type Docker images. It's going to give me a list of images. I am able to save a particular image. So if I look, where is latest primary? I believe Docker commit is what I want. Yes. So I have FMS primary running right now as an image. So with this image, or with this container having all of my software that I like, the things that I just installed, plugins, you've gotten it all to the point where you like. It's got your login that you want to use, default username, password, what have you. What you're going to do is you are now going to commit this. So you're going to do Docker commit, and what you're going to do is the FMS primary. So as soon as I do this, it's going to take a long time. It's basically taking this container, making it into an image. So it's going to be a while, because this particular one is going to be one of my larger ones. It's going to be, a 3.3 gig image, what have you. So we can see right there that it created an image in my Docker images. So now if I do a Docker images, what we're going to see as I scroll up is I get this right here. This none and none. And I actually could have taken the hash right here, this 289A. So if I take this 289A, which has got all my cool stuff that I like, and I copy that right there, now I'm going to do a Docker tag. And what I'm going to do is I'm tagging this image with what I want it to be called. And in this case, I do something like FMS. This is Ubuntu 22, and then it's 207. Now, I already have this, so I'm going to do Ubuntu 22 test. And I'm going to tag that. So now if I do Docker images, we are going to see right there is my image. This image is what I am now able to save out to my operating system, give to somebody else, and let them run and have the exact same environment that I have just set up with my plugins, my username and login for the admin console, any extra binaries, any scripts that you've written in the OS that maybe a backup schedule or something uses. Just the absolute perfect environment. And the way that you do that is you are able to reference this image of FMSU22 test, and you're able to just save that out. And that is going to be Docker save, and then you have your image, and then I believe you can go out to whatever you want to call this. So I would call this desktop FMS cool. And you're going to name it a tar file, and I believe that's what it creates. And if I do that, it's going to take a while because it's a couple of gigabytes, and I would be able to compress that tar archive, do it as a gzip. I could have piped it here as a command. It will take a while. It'll take 5-6 minutes to compress it, but that is what you can now give to somebody else who's going to run Docker Desktop, who does not necessarily have to go through the process that we just did to create an image. They would just be able to actually install the image, which that is now on my desktop. Right there, I have an fmscool.tar file. It's probably 3 gigs because it includes FileMaker Server embedded within it. We would then use a Docker import, I believe. I'm going to let you look that up. This video is amazingly long in order to learn all of this stuff. And again, there are so many things, but I've given you the commands that you can use to play with. And pretty much the only thing that you need to know is once you have imported your particular image, and again, get back to this, images are not containers. Images are templates for containers. You import an image. Once you've made that image exactly how you want, then you can actually spin up that container. And by the way, the image, if you build it for, say, for example, Linux, you can then just spawn as many as you want. This is why I use FM Cloud. This is what they are doing. They are basically, they've got these base images that they've created the way that they like. They can communicate in and out of those images with whatever monitoring and everything that they're doing. And it just runs. And you are basically running inside a computer where it's like protected and you only, and nobody else's files, no shared hosting. It's just absolutely awesome. But learn about that Docker import. Learn about there is a difference between Docker export, which exports a container, and Docker save, which saves an image. So you are going to more than likely, once you create a base image for yourself, you're going to be saving the image, not exporting a container, which there's a difference between those. And I'm going to let you look that up on the internet and learn about that. But for the most part, you are just trying to get to this point where basically you're in your containers and you're just like, nope, don't need that FileMaker server, shut it down. Shut your laptop lid, go do whatever you want to do, save your image out, put that image over on another computer, exact same environment, click easy, you just click your run, and now I've got a completely different FileMaker server running within 2 seconds. And in this particular one, I know that I'm able to get into it because I know that the username would actually work. Did that run? FMS primary... is running, should be running. Oh, one thing you should absolutely know, I'll have to troubleshoot that, is you notice that I do not have FileMaker running. When you create the image, make sure that you do not have a FileMaker client running where it's going to be occupying port 5003. Because you're doing port mapping, you have to make sure that your ports are not conflicting in terms of what's open. But that is probably the longest video that I've done about doing something on FileMaker. I know that this really only applies to those of you that are uber advanced, but once you get it running, It is absolutely cool to be able to spin up your FileMaker server and shut it down in such a quick time. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.